Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for logging in today. I'm just going to give attendees a couple of more moments. We've got a very large number of people who've RSVP'd to this final session, so just bear with me another couple of minutes. Thank you. For those of you that don't know me, my name's Catherine O'Mahony.
Well.
Thank you, everybody. My name's Catherine O'Mahony, and we're just giving another minute or two for everybody to join in. We've had a huge response to today's webinar, so thank you so much. We've had over 50 people reply yes to this webinar, so thank you. Just give people another minute or two. Just draw to your attention whilst you're waiting that we do have the chat function. I've got a colleague, Sebastian, who's attending, who's sitting in, and by all means, he can ask me any questions through the slides as we go. But whilst you're waiting for everybody else, just another minute, I do encourage you, if there's anything really top of mind, please don't hesitate to drop me a question now or during the session, and I will definitely answer that. Thank you. Right, so I'm just going to give it one more minute and then we're going to start. Okay. Fantastic. Okay, everybody, thank you so much. We'll start, and I know we'll probably have more people joining. So first of all, good afternoon, everybody. My name's Catherine O'Mahony, and thank you very much for joining me today. And I'm looking forward to sharing with you some of the results from our salary and job satisfaction survey that we conducted earlier this year. Today is the final webinar session. We've been running a number of sessions over the last 4 weeks. And I'm really pleased to say we did those by sectors. Just to let you know that today's webinar is across all sectors. We've had over 50 people RSVP, yes, and it's quite an eclectic group. So I won't necessarily be focusing on any one sector, but what I'll try and do is give you the top line results. But I would encourage you, if there's any questions as we go, we have the chat function. And please don't hesitate if a slide doesn't make sense or something I'd say. I'd like to make this interactive. The slides presentation takes approximately 25 to 30 minutes. So we've got more than ample time for questions because we've allocated up to 60 minutes. So please don't hesitate to ask the chat function. So again, what's top of mind for you? What are your challenges and what's facing you as a leader, a manager, or as an employee? Please don't hesitate to let me know for meet the requirements. So before I begin, I'd like to thank all the contributors who've made this survey possible. This is now our 16th year running the On Q Life Sciences survey. For those of you whose first time it is attending, this data is collected anonymously, and we capture data on both salaries and job satisfaction. In addition to that, we had to ask all contributors to identify what sector they are and to self-select the most appropriate job description. We also asked leaders and managers a lot of comments and insights, how the past 6 months have gone for them during the lockdown and COVID, and also what their predictions were about the next 6 months. And we asked a range of questions. The survey covers an awful lot of information. You will receive a copy of the survey at the end of the webinar. If you have a Gmail account, please check your spam or junk folder, as we've had feedback so far that the report is going. You'll also get a copy of the webinar, this link, in case you need to rewind and listen to me again, God forbid. So you'll get a copy of that. So you'll get a copy of the presentation, a copy of the full report, and a copy of the webinar recording. The survey, the actual copy of the survey you will get will cover a range of areas. Just look over to this screen. We cover salary increases, bonuses, non-cash benefits, the employee experience, the superannuation, reasons for leaving, staying. You can just see there's quite a broad range of items we asked contributors this year. What are the views of managers, employees? So some really interesting productivity and engagement questions, but bearing in mind that due to time, we can't cover everything. So by all means, please don't hesitate. If there's anything that doesn't make sense or is really pressing for you, please ask a question on all the slides I go. By way of background, the contributors came from that industry. You can see we've got a wide range of everything from pharmaceuticals to generics to clinical research to consulting to CROs. And what we always do, for those of you that are already familiar with it, we break the data down into these following sectors: from clinical, commercial, executive, market access, HR, laboratory, medical affairs, ops, QA, and regulatory. So it just gives you a top line result, but that'll all be covered in the report that you'll receive later today. So just before I begin the demographics, we had over 1,000 people contribute. The survey opened on the 8th of June, which seems like a long time ago now, in 2021. And you may recall that was just 50% of the respondents responded before we went into the second New South Wales lockdown, bearing in mind that Melbourne had also been dipping in and out at the same time. In terms of company breakdown, contributors, the 1,000+ contributors, were from a range of company sizes. Hopefully you can see that on your screen. Nearly 18% of people working for 1,000+ employees and 20% working for companies under 50. So we had a really nice range. Not unusually, 60% of the contributors were female, 40% were male. In terms of internationally owned companies versus Australian, we had 60% of contributors were working for an international company. Okay. Just in terms of how in this June, July, and the start of August, companies were telling us what they were going to do in terms of their buoyancy, it was quite positive. Companies were planning to launch products in the next 12 to 24 months. So over 76% of contributors said their company was planning to do so. So very, very positive. No surprises here with respect to product launches. The majority of challenges from people were reimbursing and pricing. And also, interestingly, it was that access to customers to be able to promote and launch their brand or new product. So that's not a surprise, particularly given what was happening in June, July, and August this year. So the number one question we've had as recruitment consultants in the past 6 months, and also what people really wanted to know about our salary survey data, was what's happening in the market, what's happening with salaries, what are we seeing? Is it the same as what everybody else is saying? And I suppose just to highlight to you, the majority, over 64% of contributors received a pay increase in the previous 12 months. This was slightly down on 2019. But it was still better than 2020. In terms of the actual pay increases, we did see a shift this year compared to last year. More people got a pay increase in that 3 to 4% increase rather than the previous year 1 to 2. But still, if you look, you're still seeing 38, 37%, over 68, 70% of people got a 1 to 2 or 3 to 4% increase. What we noticed was more people got up in the higher brackets. So there was a slight increase, and that may have been a retention strategy by employers to look at retaining their staff. Those that didn't get a pay increase was on hold or frozen due to the COVID-19 pandemic, or that was inadequate company performance. Interesting for us, which is really a big surprise, 53% of respondents didn't receive a pay increase when they changed jobs. Okay, and this is just the actual breakdown as well, a little bit further for you. So 38% 1 to 2 and 37% 3 to 4% a pay increase. Sign-on bonuses is next. So that was really interesting. Most respondents this year received a bonus. compared with the previous year. So close to 60% of people, of contributors, received a bonus. There was a lot of talk in the marketplace about sign-on bonuses and loyalty bonuses. And the loyalty bonuses were definitely something that we'd seen. That is probably more prevalent of all the industry sectors, I would have to say, is in companies, the clinical research organizations, the CROs. So that tended to be something that came from that market. Rather than giving pay increases, they were giving loyalty bonuses not to lose staff. But when we actually did break down the data, it didn't seem that a lot of companies were offering sign-on bonuses to encourage people to change jobs. Overall, international companies were more likely to offer a sign-on bonus, 12% compared with Australian companies. Are there any questions so far? Sebastian, no? Before I move on. And just touching, if you're a leader and a manager, and I go into more detail with this shortly, but where is the marketplace? Where are people setting in terms of confidence? 37% of managers indicated to us that they were going to increase, have a headcount. And 36% said they had no plans to increase headcount in their team. So it's quite buoyant. So this was what we're seeing in the market. Definitely we've experienced it since February this year and in the back end of this quarter. So what we're seeing is people were trying to, managers were definitely trying to get a headcount. When we looked at employee data, people who changed jobs or what managers were saying, the most common reason for turnover was resignation. Internal promotion was second. So that hasn't changed too much. We just break down the data for you there in terms of Australian-owned companies versus internationally. It's a slight difference, but nothing too significant. So overall, a lot of positivity from companies and managers that they were going to continue to grow or come back and try and grow their teams. I just wanted to share with you briefly, and in the presentation, when you get a copy of this, is slides on every market sector. But I wanted to, especially for those of you, it's your first time seeing this report. What we do is we give every sector. So for example, this is clinical research, and you get a top line result, which explains that this is clinical research salaries of 2021 versus 2020. What you can see here up in the top hand corner is that for this particular sector, we had 203 respondents. So when you look at any sector, you'll be able to see how much data we were able to gather for that particular sector. When you look at this sheet, which I often call the cheat sheet, I wanted to point out to you it's total remuneration, but excludes bonus. So that's total remuneration, but excluding bonuses. And you can see over here, the key is 2021 is in the dark blue versus the lighter blue is 2020. We also break the data down into first quartile, median, and third quartile. And we also have a section on bonuses for that particular job title. You'll also see that we've broken out or pulled out the car allowance data where people contributed that for us. So for example, in clinical research, if that was of interest to you, the median car allowance is sitting at 19,000. When you look at this data for your particular sector or industry, and you're wanting to know why is certain job titles missing, or why do we, for example, for clinical research team leader, we only have one data point. That's where we didn't get enough data points. So we're very transparent. If a job title is missing, it's because we didn't have enough contributors, or if there's not enough data points, we just report the median. I think the other thing to watch is where there was a lot of talk, particularly, for example, even in clinical research, what was happening with the median and the average salary. What we noticed, for example, in clinical research, the median didn't change a lot compared to the previous year. And I know the sector will be quite surprised with that. What we did notice was a couple of things. The upper quartile and the first quartile moved. So it's something I'd like to draw to your attention. The first quartile shifted up and the third quartile has shifted up. And what we also saw was more people getting promoted. So they go into the next lower quartile band and they get the job title. And we also saw an industry, particularly for those associate levels, where people who didn't have all the skill set were being brought in. So that sort of contains some of the salaries. I do talk later on about when people are moving jobs, and that is when you'll see there's a significant increase when people are actually moving jobs rather than there being movement in their current job. So just to reiterate again, if this is your first time getting our salary survey, every sector will have what I call a cheat sheet, and it gives you this year compared to last year, and it gives you everything you need to know. We then also in the report, you'll have an industry sector report. So all the job titles will be broken down: pharmaceutical, devices, CRO, pharma, FMCG, complementary, animal health. So we really try and pull out the data to give you as much information as you need for your particular sector. Are there any questions on this slide before I move on? No, I've done a great job. Okay, I'll keep going. Sebastian's shaking his head. And I'm going to just let you know, so we've got commercial, sales and marketing, executive general business management, market access, human resources, laboratory, medical affairs, quality operations, QA, and regulatory affairs. So when you get a copy of the report, you'll have all that information will be there for you to delve into. And by all means, if you've got any questions or anything doesn't make sense, you're very welcome to come back to myself or the team. I think there was a lot of talk and a lot of companies were asking us about the non-cash benefits, particularly when their larger companies aren't able to flex or match candidates' salary requirements. So what we noticed this year is that the pay increases for changing jobs was over 17%. So it's pretty high. What we also noticed was non-cash benefits, what had happened compared to previous years. So working from home, no surprise, the most common benefit, that jumped from 60% up to 80%. Compared to the previous years. But what was also equally valued by employees was flexible working hours, working from home, further studies paid by employer, and subsidized healthcare, and where possible, either rostered days off or compressed working hours. I think if you're a manager or a leader and you're looking at different strategies, how to retain your staff, as a rule, our industry treats their employees very, very well. And I think one of the key things to consider here was further studies paid for by employer. We noticed that that's a particular benefit for the younger generations, the under 40s, but particularly the under 30s. So if that's something as a policy your company offers, I would definitely recommend. Hang on, we've just had one question, Sebastian.
Yeah, Robert Gill asks, people are working from home, is that every day or some days each week?
Great. Great question, Rob. And we've actually got a slide on that. So what we have further slides on where employees have told us, are they allowed to choose, or is it the team or the company? And also we've got feedback and a slide on managers as well. So I do have that slide coming up. As a general rule, employees are telling us that they're able to decide their own working days themselves, but we're seeing a slightly different answer from managers. But I'm happily talk about that. I hope it's in this presentation because I have had it in the other ones. Any other questions before I move on?
What does compressed working hours mean?
So compressed working hours is when people would complete their 38 hours in 4 days, or they would do a 9-day fortnight. So they'd work an extra half an hour to try and do that, or a rostered day off. So that's something that's really valuable to employees with the work-life balance. What we have noticed anecdotally is when people are looking to change jobs, is if they've already got the flexible working from home and their set days, they're reluctant to change jobs if the next employer isn't offering that. So what we would have seen 2 years ago, the market has shifted. So people that have a long commute are now expecting, even within their probationary period, to be able to work remotely almost from day one. And some people have a lot of their work cut up, plan around whether it's pick up, drop off, or various activities, and they want to retain that. So it's definitely, if your company offers the working from home and is continuing to do so post us opening up, it's definitely a very good retention strategy, but also a good attraction strategy. The employee experience. So very interestingly here, and this, if you're a hiring manager, this will make sense to you. The satisfaction rates are very, very high. You can see they're almost at 68%. Satisfied or very satisfied. So the cohort of contributors are happy and content in their jobs. The majority of people are feeling more secure, or there's been no change. So there's about 14% that felt less secure and about 13% were unsure, but the overall majority were feeling very positive, and that extended to both men or women. There is a slight breakdown you can see between men and women on satisfaction, and also on security. Men felt more secure than women. So some interesting points. In terms of job satisfaction, when we delved into why people had left their previous employer, and this is the #1 reason for the last 15, 16 years of our survey, it was definitely continues to be improved salary and benefits. Lack of job satisfaction or seeking a more interesting role is #2. And interestingly enough, excessive workload. So that's sort of a new entrant on the data. Even though people were telling us they weren't working more hours, I think people were feeling the pressure maybe of working remotely. And in some industries, there was really this was a clear trigger to change jobs, which is difficult if a team has lost people and then the workload's being spread across the already very, very busy working team. Why are people staying with you? They're staying in their workplace because of flexibility. So this is 46% of people said that they were staying because of flexibility, and then because of supportive management and their relationship with their team, their line manager. So that is continuing to be the #2 reason. So not to underestimate that what are perceived or taken for granted are still really important to people. And obviously, if companies can offer a career promotion and advancement, that is another reason people will stay. Hiring talent. So when we ask contributors, were they thinking of changing jobs in the next 12 months, just under 20% said yes, they were thinking of changing jobs. Over 45% said no, and we had people sitting here on that 38% maybe. When we asked people if they'd applied for a job in the past 12 months, 38% said yes, they had. More than 38% of people had received more than one job offer, and 60% of all people who went looking for a new job received one. So I've broken this down by sector in the next slide just to give you a sense. So when we asked contributors if they'd applied for a job in the past 12 months, it was quite interesting. If you look down the left-hand side, we've actually broken down. So the overall was 38% of all contributors had said yes, they would look for a new job. Clinical, sales and marketing were also sitting 38. The senior executive leadership team, they were low. Human resources was slightly lower. Interestingly enough, an outlier for us was over 50% of all people working in laboratory jobs had indicated that they had sought a new job. We hypothesizing whether that was because they continued to have to go to their place of work during COVID, and maybe it placed undue stress on them with managing families and schools being shut, but they still had to go into the lab environment. And also this is a sector where the wages growth hasn't increased. So there, if you have laboratory staff in your team, it's something you'd really want to keep an eye on. Market access, medical affairs, and QA, interesting, was quite high as well. But regulatory affairs, for those of you in that space, that was down around a third rather than nearly 40%. At the time of the survey, we asked people if they thought border closures had impacted recruitment, and overwhelmingly 63% said no. At the time, it was really interesting. Less than 30% of companies actually had a vaccine policy, and it's only a couple of companies that are mandating it from our perspective, and most of those seem to kick in January next year after the consultation process. Is there a question?
There was a question from Suzanne a second ago about, was there any indication of headhunting to site staff at all in this data? That was 2 slides ago.
Sorry, could you repeat the question, Sebastian?
Basically, was there any indication of headhunting in this data?
Like how? Had they been approached? Yeah. Oh, no, we did. That's a good question, Susanna. We hadn't asked that. Anecdotally, I know the CRO market from speaking to various sites. They felt their staff had been headhunted, and when I mentioned that particular salary survey about those CRA roles and why the lower quartile had stayed, we're thinking people have been attracted into that with some of the skill set. So compared to, for example, 2 years ago, people wouldn't have got a CRA, a clinical research associate role. We're now seeing that people who've got 60-70% of the skills, even if they haven't got the monitoring, are being offered those roles because those particular organizations are so lean and so desperate for staff. So not in our survey, but yes, have had probably 10 different sites tell us that, yes. And all the CROs would have very strong, quite large talent acquisition teams as well, and plus recruitment consultants as well.
She's followed on and said some site staff not being happy but headhunted to go into a role as an entry level, and not ultimately a job that have been looking.
Sorry.
It says some site staff are not looking but are happy to get headhunted into a role that is an entry level. Correct. So, but not ultimately the job that they would have been looking for.
Correct, yeah. So money or attractions if you're getting inundated. So I think I've already talked about the border closures and vaccines. When we asked employers about how difficult it was to get obtaining headcount, 50% said it's definitely more difficult in the previous 6 months to get headcount. So even though there's a recognition of increased workload, companies are planning to do product launches. Overall, managers are telling us that getting the permanent headcount is more difficult than usual. In the next 12 months, employers, and this is just a breakdown, are 37% are planning to increase. Sorry, that's a duplication of that slide. Are employees likely to change jobs in the next 12 months? So 18% had said yes, they were considering changing jobs, which is not that high. We've had years where it's higher. I think what was of interest was the risk group or the maybe. When we look at the data, up to 38% of our contributors had said that they had previously applied for a job in the past 12 months. So the hypothesis is contrary to all what we've been hearing about the great wave of resignation that's been in the newspaper of late and in the media for a couple of months, and it's sort of a global trend. My thoughts are a couple of things. A lot of people, this is an industry that as a rule treats their employees really well, offers very good benefits, and the pay is good as a general rule. I think there's a couple of things that we need to consider with that group, the risk group of that group. Some of them may be waiting to see what their salary increase is awarded. They may also be waiting to see their end of year bonus. And I think also people are tired. They want to take their annual leave. So they may want to go overseas. So I think that ability to, all those factors are contributing to people not sure if they'll change jobs. So they're waiting to see what their existing employer has given. So we are not yet seeing a wave of resignation because they realize that the companies they work for already treat them quite well. But if they're not getting the rewards, we're predicting that they may be the tipping points. When we asked hiring managers about what was difficult when they had tried to recruit in the previous 6 months, 50% said the top reasons a candidate had declined a role was they had accepted a job from a competing company, but 30% had received a counter offer from their existing employer. So what we've definitely experienced that here, where people are using the job hunting process to action, the ability to get a pay rise with their existing company, where their manager has failed to be able to do so before. That trigger has been the catalyst to get a pay increase. And we're definitely seeing where people are getting more than 1 or 2 offers, and they're very much a candidate-driven market. In terms of, if on the right-hand side, you'll see the average time to fill. Only 27% of managers are filling a role within in less than 5 weeks. The average was 6 to 10 weeks. We know in some sectors that's blowing out to 11 to 15 weeks. And some people still had roles going. So it's definitely the time to fill has definitely blown out in the majority of sectors. So it's much easier to get a pay rise to your existing staff than to lose them, is probably the general consensus.
There's a question just then asking about.
Sorry, Sebastian, could you speak up?
Oh, sorry, there was a question just then about time to fill job. So does that mean a candidate got an offer or a candidate got on board? So is it from day of offer or day of start date?
That's a great question. And when we asked that question, we said that as far as what they thought the time to fill. So I think that was not the start date, but when the candidate offered, not getting the person on board. So there could be another 4 weeks on top of that. So living with COVID, and please, I've got a couple of more slides to go, but please, if there's any questions or you want me to go back and revisit it, I really encourage you to do so. I think Rob asked a question around working from home. So current employee working from home arrangements, it was quite varied. 37% of contributors, it was 1 to 5 days a week. And then people were saying it was right up to, 1 day a week, 2 days a week, 3 days per week, or 4. So I think what we're seeing is there's not an established pattern, and it's still very varied from company to company. When we asked who decides your working from home arrangements, again, you can see it's quite varied. 40% of contributors are saying they decide. In 22% of cases, the manager and the team set the working for hours and time in the office. And 20% had an employer who had a company-wide working from home policy. And then 20% of contributors said it was still fluid due to the COVID pandemic. So I think what at the time of this survey and what we're still continuing to see is it's not a one size all, not one clear strategy has come. I think there's still some companies who've brought people back sooner, but there's still been a slow watch and wait with people slowly coming back into the office with the viewpoint till January. We know anecdotally some companies are struggling to get people to come back the days that they want them to. But it is sort of all over the shop, so to speak. Interestingly enough, majority of managers would rather decide rather than have a blanket policy. But at the same time, I think it's the balance of work health and safety with the cases and the company policy, maybe at a global level. So employee preferences, if you're considering your working from home policy, when we asked employees, what was your preference? Over 73% said they would prefer a hybrid model. So some of the time in the office and some of the time working from home. Only 20% said they would now want to work at home all the time. When we asked managers about their preferences to work remotely, you can see it's very, very split. We had a large component of the contributors were manager. I think over 400 contributors were leaders and managers. Only 4% wanted their staff in the office all the time. And then if you look at basically 80% was 4 days a week, down to 1 day a week, you can see it's split. So I think the preference was 2 to 3 days a week was probably the most common preference, but again, it was split. And when we asked managers, 30% said they'd actually rather decide on a case-by-case basis for the individual. Now that's probably a challenge because companies aren't doing, it's what we've seen, aren't doing that. What we're seeing, it seems to be team-based or company-based. And 20% of managers said they've no preference at all, and their staff can choose how often they come into the office. So a real mixture on what managers want, but acknowledging that 73% of employees would prefer a hybrid model. When we asked managers about hiring remote-based workers only, in other words, that they can't come into the office at all, had their views changed? Yes, there was a significant jump compared to when we asked this question 12 months ago. So up to 30% of managers said they would actually now consider hiring remote-based staff, where this number was much lower in the previous year. 32% already employ remote-based staff, and 20% said their view hadn't changed. So something to consider. There's definitely been a shift as people and leaders and managers have got better and teams have maintained their productivity. When we asked about job satisfaction, most 63% of contributors said that their job satisfaction had stayed the same. It was equal. 17% had gone increased, but 19% that had decreased. So that was really interesting. Something to consider. Living with COVID, it was really interesting. We asked for employees feedback on team engagement and team productivity. Less than 20% said it had engagement had increased, whereas 22% felt that productivity had definitely increased during COVID and on working from home. But overwhelmingly, 65% and 67% said they saw no change, which is fantastic for companies and for employees that had done well. And then finally, we're on to the well-being slides. There was a lot of feedback from the industry on managers and employees and how they were feeling. Some of the comments from people about how to reduce workplace stress was recognizing and rewarding competent staff, providing more support and hiring more people. And obviously, it's not that easy to get increased headcount. 11% of all contributors very stressed, where 84% they were moderately or occasionally stressed. So overall, people felt they were doing well. And I think probably one of the most interesting things that came out was the increase on, and probably due to education in the media, talking about work-related stress, concern for mental well-being, and feeling unsafe at work. We asked this question last year, and what we're seeing is more increase. So I apologize. The male and female. The females is the respondents are in light blue, and the men are in dark blue. Apologies if that's not there. But what we're seeing are people are comfortable or very comfortable to talk to their manager or HR about whether they've got work-related stress. And what we're also seeing is whether people would go and talk to their manager or human resources business partner about mental well-being and if they felt unsafe at work. I think what was interesting, and this was the same as last year, men felt more comfortable approaching their manager or HR about if they felt for their mental well-being. So this is 2 years in a row, and I think this probably goes against what the expectations are about why this is. So this isn't a 1 year anomaly. This is 2 years in a row where men seem to be more comfortable. Where you can see with the other slides, unsafe and work-related stress, there's very little differences in the genders. Okay, so thank you so much. I'm going to finish here and open it up to the floor in terms of questions. I know I've covered a lot of data and a lot of information, and then just to recap, everybody who's attended will get a copy of the everybody who's attended the survey today will get a copy of the slides, so that's fantastic. And also to say that you'll get a copy of the webinar, and if you have any questions, you absolutely don't hesitate to come back. Well, what I'd like to do is, we've still got 10 or 15, 20 minutes, as long as you want. Is there anything else I haven't covered today? Because we've got a plethora of information. Is there anything you want to ask me about salaries or key points, or anything I haven't covered that you'd really like to know more about?
Lily has asked if you could show the Medafare data specifically and highlight any key points. Yeah,
medical affairs, great. Yes, okay, good. I will jump to that slide now. Has anybody else got anything that they'd like to ask about? Well, I'm just going back to medical affairs, so I don't make you all seasick while I'm looking at the data. I'll just share that slide now.
No other questions just yet.
No other slides? Okay, wonderful. So can you see my medical affairs slide? Yeah. I think, Lily, probably what we noticed more this year was a jump in pharmacovigilance. Now, in some cases, pharmacovigilance contributors don't think they should be coming under medical affairs. So I think we may need to look at next year whether that's a separate sector. So we did see an increase definitely, and we've seen it in the market face for pharmacovigilance at the senior level. In terms of medical science liaison, there has been a jump, mainly in the median and upper quartile, 158 last year to 168 this year. So definitely an increase there. So that's been probably the most significant thing. And if you also look at, when you look at, for example, medical affairs scientific manager, that is a job title that is so different across every company. It's always really hard to benchmark it. So you need to see what sort of, when you look at the report, what industry or what industry sector they work for. Bearing in mind the majority of contributors to medical affairs are from pharmaceutical, ethical contributors, but we do have generics as well, and sometimes OTC. We didn't have a lot of data points on medical information, unfortunately, but you can see there the data. So that's probably the number one thing I'd say was the pharmacovigilance managers and the jump on MSLs. Not a lot of change, really much on medical advisors as much as you'd expect. Does that answer that question? Great.
The same question came through from Emily, but in regards to regulatory affairs data.
Yeah.
And then there was also a question from Sue around the vaccine policy slide.
Yes.
And whether companies are helping employees get the vaccine or whether they are encouraging instead of asking them to get vaccinated on their own terms.
Oh, as in,
if a company has a vaccine policy, do they provide the vaccine somehow, or is it up to the employees to get it in their own time?
Actually any of the information we've got, the policies we've got so far from companies on vaccines, it hasn't covered that. We've had 2 or 3 companies come back to us with their vaccine policy with respect to recruiting new staff or covering any of our contractors. And I can't recall where they've offered to compensate people for taking the time off to go and get a vaccine. No, I haven't seen that, but we didn't ask that in our salary survey. We just asked if companies had a policy. And if you recall, the majority of companies at the time of the survey didn't have a policy. And there's obviously been a lot of changes with the legislation and like BHP and workers there. In terms of regulatory affairs, I apologize who mentioned that. You'll notice that the medians stayed pretty consistently for regulatory affairs. But what we did see was some jumps in the first quartile, more so than the upper quartile. So it's been pretty consistently. We get over 240 people in regulatory affairs. So that's one of our strongest contributing groups. They're always very, very keen for the data. You'll probably see it's consistent. The medians are very consistent, except for the regulatory affairs project manager median was quite different, was quite high this year. Then other than that, it's some movement in the director and head of regulatory affairs, but that's often impacted depending on what industry sector you work for: pharma, the devices, diagnostics, complementary medicine, animal health. But you can rest assured the data is pretty consistent. Median for a Reg Affairs associate versus a senior. Does that answer the question?
Emily had her hand up, who was the one who asked about regulatory affairs, and I've allowed her to unmute so she can ask.
Right, Emily.
Hi, Catherine. Thanks very much for this very comprehensive, webinar.
Thank you.
Just my last question with regards to the regulatory affairs. I'm
Yes.
interested to see within the scope of respondents, are they mostly from big pharma versus the more smaller companies, or is there a broad, range around that in order to get an idea of where the median would come from?
Yes, I didn't include because we had so many people from so many sectors. So, for example, in the regulatory affairs sector, I would have had the second page. I might actually get Sebastian to pull out
Tufa did post the recorded webinar link for Emily, so I highly encourage her to go have a look at that.
Regulatory one.
Grace will speak through all of these questions.
Yeah, so one of our consultants that leads the regulatory affairs practice has done that, but we might, Emily, just pull up the salary surveys, the actual report. Sorry, I didn't bring it into the webinar with me. And from recollection, there's quite a big spread. But generally, regulatory affairs is across all company sizes. What we notice anecdotally is the company size you work for in regulatory affairs makes no difference to the salary remuneration or even the size of the number of direct reports you have.
That's very interesting. Thank you.
The only place it's different for regulatory affairs is Melbourne. So for the last 15 years, it's probably the only outlier on every other market sector that for some reason reg affairs managers in Melbourne, and maybe the smaller biotech companies there, but the salaries are not as competitive. Whereas in the Sydney market, it wouldn't matter if you were with the multinational or with a mid-sized company. The actual job title dictates the salary because they need to pay it to attract people.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that.
No worries. Thanks, Emily.
And Robert Gill also mentioned in relation to vaccines that they allow staff to go and get vaccinated during company time.
Oh, great. Thanks very much, Rob. So just to if to reiterate there, the person who asked the question on vaccine, Rob who's in human resources, and I don't think he'll mind me mentioning, their company allows people the time off. Yeah, it's a good question. We never thought of doing that. So please feel free. We've still got another 10-15 minutes if anybody would like to ask any more questions. Bearing in mind, of course, you're going to get a copy of the full report, as well as the webinar, as well as the copy of the presentation. And any questions or anything, you can more or less come back. We've had one question. Seb, what's that one?
Just looking at that one. Overseas, all the overseas workers, something. Do you think that borders opening up and allowing in overseas workers will affect the job/recruitment market?
Well, it's a great question. When we asked our clients that question in the survey, they didn't think that the borders closing impacted. I think the area that we've noticed the impact is potentially being in clinical research, but in fact, they've been able to get senior people through on the global talent migration visa. So I'm actually not sure that it's going to impact significantly. I think the only area that Sebastian and I probably have seen it has been in the research and development area, where those skill set, particularly in that biotechnology space, when they're at the cutting edge of research and development, the skill set doesn't exist in Australia, but usually you can get them through on the visas. So other than clinical research, I don't think it's been impacted. I thought more people would have said yes, but mainly it's been clinical research or CROs have indicated that it's impacted. No other cohort has indicated to us that it's impacted them. I hope that answers your question. Tal has asked a question. Sorry, Tal, I didn't, or Ty, I just saw your question. Do we know if regulatory affairs for animal health is similar? Sebastian's just pulling up the full salary report, so I can come back to that in a few minutes. Yeah. But yeah. But by all means, if anybody particularly wants to watch a webinar that besides this one that was from a particular market niche, you're very welcome to contact us and we can send you the recording of that. There were ones on a whole various different areas. But it's definitely, I mean, we're getting a lot of questions from clients that are worried. Will they be able to retain their staff? Are salaries moving? We are definitely, I'm predicting that the next 24 months is probably going to be the tightest labour market I've seen in almost 28 years of recruiting in this life sciences sector, because it's definitely clients that are coming to us that only would use us when they absolutely have to due to budgetary constraints, and they're indicating to us they're getting no responses to their advertisements or LinkedIn, and a lot of them have very, very good value propositions. So my advice to leaders and managers is if you can retain your staff over the next 12 to 18 months, it's definitely the best, most economical and easiest strategy, rather than having to go to the market unless you've got a clear value proposition. Well, if there's no more questions at the moment, Ty, we're just going to come back to you about your question on regulatory affairs and animal health, sorry. But I'd like to thank everybody for logging on today. I know, apologies, I'm not getting to see you all in person. Thank you again if you were a contributor. I know we have a number of fantastic people who are really supportive of this salary and job satisfaction survey. By all means, any questions, anything that doesn't make sense when you read the report, or you want to know more about salary movements in the market, please don't hesitate to come back to myself or the team. And we look forward to connecting with you next year. And if you've got Gmail, please check your junk folder. You know, because you will get by the end of the day a copy of this report. Thank you so much. We've really enjoyed talking to everybody, and we've had an amazing turnout. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. And Ty, if you just hang on, we'll Ty, just hang on 1 second. We'll try and keep on board for you.
We don't break it down specifically for animal health, but I feel like it would fall under the innovator.
Yeah, if you turn around, okay. Thank you for your feedback.
Find this is last year's.
Ty, it looks like we didn't have a lot of contributors from animal health. I'll have to get back to you on that one. Anecdotally, it's, I would say on average, slightly lower than pharma, like human health. But I'll have to come back to you. I sincerely apologize. We'll do that. Thanks, everybody. It's been really nice to hear from you all. Ty, and thank you again. If you have any questions when you get the report, please don't hesitate to come to myself or anybody at the On Q team. And again, thank you to Atufa, our head of marketing, who's put in enormous work into promoting this and getting the survey ready. I'd like to thank her for all her efforts. And please, any feedback or suggestions